About a month ago, I still was at a hospital and I spent some time after that getting back on my feet. After about 2.5 weeks, I decided to slowly start working again, but I still felt pretty weak and the tremendous heat we had over here most days didn't help either. And as I had expressed at the end of my last video, I would have wished for a smaller, less challenging project than what I had worked on over the past months. However, as life goes, something pretty big came up that had to be done now or never, and that is what this video is about. You might remember that a little over half a year ago I took you guys on a little field trip to a local machine shop, where a man in his 70s had worked by himself for decades, using conventional machine tools exclusively. And I'd actually paid him a number of visits over a couple of weeks, and it felt like I had just found a new friend that I wished I had gotten to know much earlier. Because unfortunately, the shop was just about to close its doors forever, since the owner was about to retire. It took him a few months longer though to finally say goodbye to all his tools, and this gave me a little more time to think about an important matter. Among the tools that were for sale was this milling machine, including a huge amount of tooling and additional equipment. Since the old shop is only about 3 kilometers from my location, it seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime chance. So about 2 months ago, I finally said yes, I'm going to buy that milling machine. I had already paid for it, but there still were some pretty big obstacles to overcome. Hauling the 1.3 ton milling machine to my workshop and also moving it inside the building so I can use it here for future projects. So come and follow me along then and see how I did it. Over at the old workshop, we will have from a friend who has a lot of experience with this kind of thing. Also, we can just borrow a forklift from a neighboring business that we can use to put the milling machine on top of a rental trailer that I will rent before driving there. That entire side of this undertaking is already planned out, but there were still 3 open questions that needed to be answered. How to get the machine into my workshop and then off the trailer and then to its final position inside the shop. And since it has been something that I wanted to do for a long time anyway, I decided to answer these questions by building a gantry crane. And as always, we will try to do that using scrap materials. So a while ago I found these rather heavy weldments here on a scrapyard. And they have been sitting in my garden for a good while. And today they have finally found their purpose. Left over from the same assortment we built the CNC table from are several I-beam sections, and I had actually begun working on them as well while working on that project. Also, a key feature to be able to move the milling machine inside the shop are heavy casters. 4 of them were formerly used for my old wooden workbench. Until I have bought higher quality replacements, we will reuse them for this gantry crane. And here you can see these parts. I laid everything out here in the garden to get an idea of the dimensions of the final product. I then proceeded by preparing these 2 I-beam sections to be drilled into using a drill press. When working on unwieldy workpieces like these, even something that simple can be a real challenge to do. This entire part of the workshop, by the way, will be completely remodeled over the course of this video. It's really just a hodgepodge of machines that still have to find a permanent place here in the shop. Each I-beam section gets 4 holes at each end so that the casters can be bolted down there. And after having done that, I set the beams on wooden blocks so that the casters no longer touch the ground. This will help me in aligning the parts. The long I-beam is now placed on top temporarily so that I can determine how far apart the sections and casters will eventually be. In the meantime, I also prepared 2 of these girders here to be welded on both ends. When I first found them, I was sure they were galvanized, but they are actually just painted with a very thick and extremely robust gray paint. It was a lot of work to remove enough of it on both ends, but it was a necessary step. In order to proceed with this project, something completely different also had to be taken care of. See, this side of the workshop actually has a very wide double wing door made from wood and glass. However, I think it hasn't been fully opened in a number of years, and I first had to get rid of a lot of clutter to be able to open it all the way. So this is where the gantry crane will be positioned, when I will then back into the workshop with the trailer with a milling machine on top of it. It seemed so tangible at this point, but it was still a lot of work. I did all this, by the way, at a humid 33 degrees Celsius, and it was really tough to stay on track. In order to free up the long I-beam, but keep the correct alignment of the bottom part of this gantry, I clamped the left and right beam sections to two oak beams that had been lying around here for a while. This also allowed me to roll this assembly around the shop and see if I could even maneuver a gantry this size inside the workshop. Ideally, the gantry crane could also be later disassembled again, and that is why I drilled some 16mm holes into the upper ends of these two weldments. They will be employed to fasten the I-beam on top. I will not rely on those bolts alone though, as you will see in a minute. I was then able to lean one of these parts against the wall on one side using spacers, and this would be useful in positioning these parts before actually welding them to the lower I-beam sections, and that is exactly what I did next. And after finishing the welding job on one side, I turned the gantry around so that I could lean the remaining part on the opposite side against that wall as well, before welding it to the beam. I did my best to first tack the parts in place and then measure and correct the angles as well as I could under these circumstances. I wanted to do good work here, but in this particular situation I was also under a lot of pressure and everything here is a little rougher than usual. In the next step, I decided to erect some wooden scaffolding to stabilize the structure and also supply a number of intermediate supports for the top I-beam. Without them it would have been way too dangerous to try to lift the long beam on top. The left-hand side of the gantry was also tied to the wall with ropes, and after making sure that the angle pieces were sitting on the right height, they were now also TIG welded to the structure. In the next step I attempted to lift the beam up and put it in place. On the left hand side the beam was held in place with ropes, while I lifted it up on the right hand side step by step using the scaffolding. I want to warn you not to take this as an example of how to approach something like this, especially when you are still recovering and especially during a heat wave like this. In this case, nothing happened, but I just want to let you know that these methods were born out of a certain desperation and not because they are particularly smart or recommended. However, under these circumstances, I at least tried my best to increase the strength of the welds and also introduced these two diagonal steel tubes to make the structure more rigid. In the meantime, the question had come up, of course, what kind of chain hoist I could use to lift the machine off the trailer. I was first planning to use this 3-ton Yale chain hoist to do the job, but more about that in just a minute. So the big day had come, Thursday 8 AM. I just rented the trailer and before picking up the machine, I wanted to see if I would be able to even fit the trailer into the shop and under the gantry. That part worked out fine so far. There still was an open question about the height of the milling machine though. Since this type of trailer is around 60 centimeters tall, the combined height of the machine and the trailer would be around 2 meters 15 centimeters. The question is not if you will be able to drive into the shop. The question is if the windows over the door will still be in one piece. By the way, doing this on a Thursday wasn't great timing. Since the trailer rental company is closed on weekends, you can give it back on Friday and pay around 60 euros, or bring it back on Monday and pay for 4 days, and that would be 240 euros. This added unnecessary pressure to an already tense situation. So I drove to the old shop where we managed to get the machine onto the trailer. I own the official manual for this milling machine, and this is how straps are supposed to be used when lifting it off the ground. But it's illegal to film people in Germany without their explicit consent. And since this shop here is in the middle of the city with all kinds of people running around, I can't show you much footage. It's a general problem when running a YouTube channel in Germany. Many formats simply don't work here. We used 4 ratchet straps to secure the load, and I drove off to my workshop. The Subaru did great work here, by the way, and the drive was uneventful. I arrived at the workshop unscathed. There were a few raindrops while I parked in the garden, but I was able to wipe the machine dry with a towel. Some 2x4s were used to make it easier to back the trailer over this step. So the first part of the plan had worked. The machine was in the shop and under the gantry. Now we needed to get it off, and for this I had asked my buddy Sami to come and join me. This is not the kind of work you want to do all by yourself. So everything seemed to go as planned, but for two miscalculations on my part. See, the rental trailer, which is normally used to haul cars around, is 25 centimeters taller than the smaller trailer I use on a daily basis. When building the gantry, I used the smaller trailer to estimate the height needed to lift the machine off the trailer. But with 60 centimeters height instead of 35, the distance between the top of the milling machine and the upper I-beam is simply too small to employ the massive 3-ton hoist that I had planned to use here. It's old, but I'm confident that it would be able to do the job. It just doesn't fit. I realized this the evening before the big day and didn't know how to get a replacement quickly enough. So I ordered a supposed 2-ton chain hoist on Amazon, and I paid extra for quick delivery. And indeed it came here on Thursday, right after I had arrived at the shop with the cargo. But look at this yourself. 3-ton hoist, 2-ton hoist. 3-ton, 2-ton. Let's just say that it is just completely obvious that the old Yale hoist was built using completely different calculations in terms of safety. But we were willing to at least try to lift the machine just a centimeter off the trailer and see what happens. So while assuming the wrong height for the trailer was mistake number 1, mistake number 2 was to use this sketchy chain hoist at all. As you can see here, we managed to lift the machine high enough so that it was basically free floating over the surface. We had to let the air out of the tires, and we also attempted to put the gantry up on wooden blocks to gain a few centimeters. But what happened next made me rethink this approach. Unfortunately, it happened off camera, because my phone overheated all the time this day because it was just too hot in here. But here's what happened. After we had lifted the machine just barely off the trailer, I took 2 or 3 minutes to have a look at the gantry from a few meters away and had a glass of water, when suddenly and without warning the hoist gave way and the machine crashed back onto the surface of the trailer. This happened without any discernible reason and without any prior indication of failure. But it didn't matter why. Fact is that this Chinesium hoist, supposedly rated at 2 tons, couldn't even handle 1.3 tons. So I told Sami to call it a day and go home. I then called the rental company and let them know that I wouldn't be returning the trailer before Monday. And we had actually tried every trick in the book for almost 3 hours to increase the distance between trailer and I-beam. And now the hoist turned out to be dangerous. There just was no way to save this situation on a sweltering Friday afternoon. So I took a step back and came up with a plan for a second attempt on Monday. So I know that many of you are used to stores having opened on every day of the week and often in the evenings or even at night. Here in Germany, small and mid-sized shops like tool dealers and equipment rental stores close on Friday afternoon or even at noon, only to reopen on Monday morning. Usually only big chain stores are open on Saturday, and they don't have any quality chain hoists for over a ton of load either. On Sundays, basically all stores and businesses in this country are closed. Gas stations, restaurants, etc. are open, of course, but I don't think they have any hoists. Sami was also gone for the weekend, so in other words, for the next 2 days, the trailer with the machine on top would simply sit in the workshop for better or worse. This first seemed like bad luck, but it gave me some air to breathe and some time to come up with a solution. After researching a local source for a quality chain hoist that I could pick up on Monday, I started to work on another idea. See, while the gantry has the right height to be rolled around the shop, it simply needs to be a little taller just for this one task of getting the milling machine off this trailer. At least between the ceiling lights, it would be able to gain another 25 centimeters by simply, well, putting it on 25 centimeter tall supports. So I decided to make 2 of those supports from the 2 remaining weldments. After cutting these large parts into 3 segments each, I employed the plasma cutter to cut another piece of scrap metal into 4 equally sized rectangular pieces that will act as base plates of sorts for these supports. With what little dwindling argon supply I had left, I started to weld these parts together. And yes, you guessed it, it's very hard to buy welding gases in Germany on the weekend as well. So yeah, you're just not supposed to work on weekends in this country. In the next step then, 2 hydraulic car jacks, some 2x4s and some ratchet straps were used to get the supports under the gantry all by myself. On Monday morning I then drove to a local tool store and bought this 1.5 ton chain hoist for almost 3 times the price. But this is what I should have done in the first place. This is not the kind of thing to save money on. And luckily my buddy was also able to come back that afternoon, so it was time for a second attempt.
Jetzt ist es gerutscht hier drauf.
Wow, Alter, geil. Ja, nice.
Endlich.
Jetzt ist sie endlich da, wo sie hin soll. Und hier ist sogar direkt eine Starkstromsteckdose.
Ja, perfetto.
So you can imagine that it was a huge relief to have the trailer out of the shop and the milling machine at its new spot. And it was a really beautiful moment of joy to see her chip away for the first time. Probably one of the most satisfying moments for me in a very long while. So what you're seeing here is just me going through some of the basic operations and just familiarizing myself with the machine. So this is not for a project, just playing around here really. However, rest assured that it won't be long until this new addition to the shop will be used to build new things and make replacement parts for future repairs and restorations here in the workshop. Another reason why I decided to buy this particular machine a few months back was not only the milling machine itself and its close proximity, but also the tremendous amount of tooling and additional equipment that came with the machine. Everything from vices, chucks and entire tool carts over tool holders, and of course mills and cutters of all kinds. But I will simply need some time to even sort through all of it. I will tell you more about it when we will use some of these items in future projects. For now, I'm simply relieved that this mission has been accomplished and that I will now finally, hopefully, find a few more days to rest a little bit and find time to recover completely, so I can come back soon for the next adventure. So if you liked this video and can't wait to see the new equipment in action, please give the video a thumbs up. It would mean a lot to me. I would also appreciate it if you would consider making a donation to help with the production of future videos. A link for that is down in the video description. You can also help this channel by becoming a supporter on Patreon under patreon.com/tpai. See you soon.